So this is video number 5 in the series that I'm doing on grief and loss, and I'm walking through this on camera, just sharing some things that I'm learning, some things that I'm experiencing. I felt early in the process, I heard the Lord telling me to share the process and to minister to other people in this way. So for the time being, as I'm in the grieving process, that my mission field is other people who are grieving, and I'm going through the grieving process and working through my father passing from this world to eternity in August. And I am careful to say from here to eternity, because even though their body died, we're eternal beings, and so he's very much alive, but he's alive in heaven with the Lord, not alive here on earth. But I have a hard time saying dead, because that seems like someone just like is ceasing to exist, but that's not true. And so if you hear me saying that and you wonder why I say it like that, that's why. So whether people believe in God or they don't believe in God, we are all eternal beings. So we're all going to exist for eternity. It's just a matter of, will we exist in heaven for eternity, or will we exist in hell for eternity? One is a place full of light and love, and the other is a place full of torment and suffering. And so my dad is alive, and he's with the Lord. The Bible says to be absent from the body is to be with the Lord. And so I just wanted to share with you guys on this video where I'm at in the process, and just talk about some things that are normal for people going through the process. And again, I'm grieving my dad passing from here to eternity. However, a lot of people, any sort of trauma, any sort of loss, any sort of anything, there's grief that goes along with it. So even if you're not grieving a person, you could be grieving a pet. I mean, they become like our families. Like, it was very hard. We lost our dog I think it's been almost 3 years now. That was hard. It felt like losing a family member. And it was a couple years before I could even talk about it without like bursting into tears. And a loss is a loss, regardless of, something that means something important to us. Like, we can even grieve things in our life in a healthy way. There's an unhealthy thing where we can get attached to material things, but even, we can even grieve things in our life that are not necessarily alive when we lose something. Like, when we move out of a house, there's a grieving process that goes along with that. Because you have memories in the house, that sort of thing. So whatever you're grieving, don't feel silly about it. Know that it's good and healthy to walk through the process. And I always like to open in prayer. So I just pray that the Lord would be with us and speak through me as I do this video, that he would speak things that everybody needs to hear, or that people need to hear, and that his truth would come through, and that people's spiritual eyes and ears would be opened wherever they have been closed. People would get spiritual understanding, and that through the sharing of this process, that the Lord would bring comfort and healing and clarity of mind, and strength, in Jesus' name. So in my last video, I talked about how the Lord was really showing me to ask myself 2 questions. And he started doing this before the grieving process, but in the grieving process, he's really been emphasizing to me to ask myself 2 questions. I'm going to reiterate those because I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in this video. The first question was, what is the truth when a thought comes into my mind walking through the grieving process? What is the truth, and what are you believing right now? And those have been so helpful, because through the grieving process, all of the emotions that we feel and we experience, we can really go down a rabbit trail and really get ourselves into a darker place than we're already at in the grieving process, because there's a lot of dark feelings that come with this process, but depending on where we let our mind go, it can become darker and more tormenting and more awful than it already is. So and then the other thing that the Lord has been talking to me about a lot, even before the grieving process, was balance. That we have a tendency as human beings to get out of balance in anything and everything. And what he's saying is, not too far to the left and not too far to the right. There's a balance. We need to maintain balance. And without him, we can't maintain that balance. And that's why it's so important to walk through everything with the Lord and say, Lord, something's off. Help me out. And he'll point things out to us and show us where we've gone too far to the left or gone too far to the right. And he'll help us to find that balance. I'm so glad he's been teaching me that, but I'm going to talk about that as well, because that has been a big part of the grieving process. Because if I let myself go too far one way in my thoughts or too far the other way in my thoughts, I can get to a place that's really hard to get out of. And some people go to those places and they don't get out of them. And so what the Lord's been showing me is go through the process. There are a lot of similarities that as people we're going to experience going through the process, but there's also a lot of differences because we're so unique and our experiences are so unique. So, especially like the time that it's going to take us to get through the grieving process, the thoughts that we'll have, the feelings that will come up, when they'll come up, which triggers we have, all kinds of things. So, when we're feeling out of balance, getting really in tune with what's going on inside of ourselves and saying, okay, God, help me, what's the true and right balance here? So, a couple thoughts and a couple things that I wanted to share just about this journey, where I felt the Lord bring me back to balance, bring me back to the truth. Early on, when my dad had first passed, I was in my bedroom and I was getting some stuff ready because we had to travel out of state. We had an upcoming trip. We were going out of state to visit him and other family members. And in the meantime, a few weeks before that trip happened, my dad had passed. And so my head was fuzzy and cloudy and I was having a hard time thinking. I was packing stuff up and, trying to get stuff ready because at the same time, then I had to start planning the memorial service. And so on top of going out of state, on top of grieving the loss of my dad, also trying to plan this, and it didn't need to be perfect, but I wanted it to be good and I wanted it to honor him and his memory, and I wanted it to be something that would be pleasing to him if he were here, and it's kind of like I felt like it was one special way to honor the passing of a person. And so I was doing that and I was in my room and I was packing stuff up, and it just hit me like what I was doing, and it was just like, is this really happening? Like, am I really, looking through my closet and trying to figure out, what do I wear to a memorial service? And just like, gosh, I thought we were going to hang out together, and now I have to write this speech about him and he won't be there. And it just really hit me how real this was and that it was really happening. And I just broke down. I was crying. And my mind just got real boggled and I couldn't get back on task and I needed to get my stuff packed. And I just felt like I was just going to melt onto the floor because those feelings were so overwhelming and they felt so awful and it was just so surreal. And I felt the Lord say inside of me, what are you believing? And then I was thinking, examining my thoughts. What am I believing? And I was at that moment in time, I was believing that, my dad had passed. I'm not going to get through this. I can't go on. That's what I was believing. And the Lord was saying, what's the truth? And I was like, I don't know. In that moment, I didn't know what the truth was, but the Lord is so faithful and so loving and kind and gracious. And he told me the truth. And he said, you don't need your parents. And I was like, what? You don't need your parents. And I'm crying. Like, you don't need your parents right now the same way that you needed them as a child. And this was the truth for my circumstance. Like, I know that there are other people, like kids out there, and a parent dies, and they did need their parent in that way. They did depend upon their parent. So I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but I mean, the Lord speaks to us specifically in our own circumstance. So for that child, the Lord would speak something else to them. But for me, the Lord was saying, you're believing that you need your dad to go on in this life. And he was telling me ever so gently, that's not the truth. Like, you don't need him to care for your physical needs. You don't need him to care for your financial needs. You're independent of him in those ways. And I thought about it, and at first it kind of stung my heart, but then I was like, oh, the Lord's bringing me back to the truth. And I was like, you're right. I don't need him the way I needed him when I was a child. But I said, Lord, but I want him. But in that moment, him bringing me back to the truth, even though it hurt. And it even kind of hurt a little bit to admit that I didn't need him in that way anymore. But realizing that's true. You know what? I'm still going to be able to feed myself. I'm still going to be able to clothe myself. And I can go on. And this is going to be really painful. But the truth of the matter is I can care for myself in those ways. And I'm going to miss him. And I do want him here. But, you know, I was in a different season of my life, and that actually, even though it hurt and I cried, it was kind of a painful truth, but it gave me the strength and the courage, and I was able to finish packing up my stuff and realizing I can still go on. That was a lie that I was thinking, that I can't go on without him. And so that's just an example of how the Lord, it's not always a happy truth, but the Lord will bring us back to the truth. And that's why I always reiterate, it's so important to invite the Lord into your life if he's not already your Lord and your Savior, because he's so gentle and he does guide us in such specific ways. And so that was just one way that he met me right where I was at, and he turned wrong thinking into the right thinking. Another thing that the Lord helped me do was when my dad had first passed, and I was praying about it, and I was thinking, okay, I just felt the Lord urging me, to step into this leadership position of doing planning for the memorial, and even put it on my heart that he wanted me to share a special message at my dad's memorial. And my first thought was like, what? Like, I'm a mess. Like, how do I even keep it together? I don't even think I'm going to be able to talk. You know what I mean? And I just kept feeling him telling me to do that. And then I realized that, like, as he was speaking to me, I realized the truth is that if the Lord is telling me to do this, then he's going to fill me with the courage and the strength and the words, and he's going to help me get through it. He's not going to say he wants me to do something, and then when I go and do it, I'm going to fall on my face. You know what I mean? And so I said, okay, Lord, I don't see how I'm going to be strong enough to do this, but I trust you and I believe you that you will make me strong on that day. And what he did is actually, even before that day, he just by praying, like, Lord, help, what do I even write? I needed to write my dad's obituary. So he helped me. He gave me the words and he gave me the strength. And I wrote the obituary, and it was so hard and it was so surreal. And, he just helped me do that. And then the day of the memorial, he helped me speak up there. And yeah, I cried right through it, but I didn't just melt on the ground, and I wasn't unable to get through it. And that was not my own strength, because everything in me just wanted to crumble. But the Lord held me up and delivered a powerful message through me, not my message, but the Lord's message. He was just showing me, like, you have the attention of all these people. Speak my truth. These people need it. And it was really cool. And also another cool way that the Lord helped my thinking when it was going the wrong way and brought it to the right way was when I got out to California. Well, that's where my dad was living, and I was living in a different state, Tennessee. And so we went out there, and I went to his house for the first time without him being there. And it was actually very comforting. Maybe some of you have experienced this. I don't know. It was very comforting. It was hard for me to go in and know he wasn't going to be there. And I kind of felt like, he was going to come walking around the corner or something. And he didn't, of course. But I liked seeing how he left things when he went to sleep that night. And it brought comfort to me to just see his environment and see his flip-flops over, where he left them before bed, and see how he left things, and that brought comfort. And so I was there, and we went a couple times, and then one of the times we were going through stuff and trying to sort through some things, and that was really hard. And this is one of the times where the wrong thinking came to me, because I knew that was going to be the last time I was going to be at the house before I had to leave and go back out of state, back home. And I had this flood of emotions that overwhelmed me, and I felt like I wasn't going to be able to leave the house. I felt like I just couldn't do it because I felt if I left the house that I was leaving my dad behind. And I almost started to panic. And I had that thought, and I was going through things, and I had to make quick decisions about what was special to me that I wanted to bring home, and I didn't have a lot of space in my car. So I kind of felt like I was like grabbing at things to try and hold my dad close to me, but he was already passed. And so I kind of started to feel rushed. And by the way, this breath, what really helps me with the Lord taught me this years ago, and I taught it to my kids, and sometimes they despised me when I reminded them to do it, but it's not a child thing. It's for all of us. It's for our system, calming our system down. Just that a slow, deep breath, several in your nose, out your mouth. It just calms down your whole nervous system. So and that breath, several of those helped me get through everything that I've been doing, especially dealing with this mourning and grieving process. So if you haven't enacted that in your life, man, do it. It just really helps. And when those emotions come flooding in, you can see it already calmed me down. It brings peace and relaxation. It's a mechanism that the Lord has built into our body to bring us peace. So get really good at doing that. It's really deep, very slow. It has to be in your nose, out your mouth. It brings oxygen to all your cells. Man, that helped me so much, even in delivering the eulogy at my dad's memorial service. But yeah, that was one of the things, is it brings you back to balance. And it doesn't mean that it's always going to make you stop crying, but it really will bring your nerves and your emotions and everything, and it just kind of like brings them some peace and some calm when there's a storm going on inside. But anyways, so I was at my dad's, and I felt like I was grasping at things, and I felt the Lord keep trying to tell me, you don't need to take all of his stuff, because that's not going to bring him back to you. He's already passed into eternity, and you can't change it. And none of this stuff, taking it back with you, none of it is actually him. And so that really helped me when I felt like, I have to take everything, I can't leave anything behind. That helped me whittle things down and say, what is important? What am I going to regret it if I don't take this? And also I would even say, if you're not in the frame of mind at one point to make those decisions yet, sometimes you need to come back and make those decisions later. And if you are able to set things aside and come back to them at a later point in time, maybe when you're more level-headed, and make those decisions, that's okay. I'm not saying you have to make the decisions right away. And I'm not saying that, like, if I was local, I probably would have kept a lot more things and then gone through maybe later on. I don't know for sure, but I think because I had to leave, the Lord helped me to cut off some of those things through the process. But that same day, I went into my dad's closet, and his clothes and everything were still in there. And I was looking around, and I wanted to take a few pieces of his clothing with me. And I was like, what do I take and what do I leave? I felt like every piece of clothing that I left behind was like me not caring about my dad or not caring about his memories. And I felt like if I left those things again, when I was in the closet, it came to me again. I felt like I was leaving my dad behind, and I started to kind of panic, and I felt like the walls were kind of closing in on me, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to buckle at the knees right now. I'm just going to fall on the ground and sob, and I'm not going to be able to leave the house. And it came back to me again. And I started envisioning like that I didn't think that with a good conscience I could actually walk out of the house. And I was like, what's going to happen? Is my husband going to like drag me out of the house kicking and screaming? Like, am I just going to have like a total mental meltdown? But I wasn't laughing about it. I was crying, and I was overwhelmed, and I felt anxious, and I felt sad, scared. And then the Lord again said, what's the truth? What are you believing right now? And right at that moment, I started to take that deep breath, and I was like, okay, started to get composure and realized that I wasn't leaving my dad behind by leaving those clothing things, and so I was just asking the Lord, okay, Lord, can you show me what things would be important for me to take that's going to bring me comfort and not to bring too many things. And like about a minute after that, my husband comes walking in the room and he said, hey, you have to come see this. And so we walk out of the room and we walk to the back of the house. And this is California. This is like dry desert land, right? Well, it had started to drizzle a little that day. And we walk outside and there's this huge rainbow across the sky. Huge rainbow, beautiful. And I was like, wow. And I just knew that the Lord was speaking to me through that and saying, it's going to be okay. I'm here with you and you're going to get through this. And it was just so beautiful. And there's a lot of other ways that I've seen the Lord just giving me these hugs and these signs and these reminders that I'm not alone, that I'm going to make it through, that he's helping me, that his angels are helping me through. And so I want to encourage you guys, the Lord is everywhere helping us. He's calling out to us. He's trying to reach our heart, trying to speak to our spirit. So be open to receiving that help from him. Be open to receiving that communication and that help from him. You don't need to do this on your own. I don't know how anyone walks through this process without God helping them. So what I was going to say too, and you don't have to walk around like, I don't know, like just keeping your eyes open, keeping your heart and your spirit open, like knowing that the Lord will show up, but I don't have to walk around like, where's the Lord? Like, you know what I mean? Like digging and finding and making things up like, oh, that's God. Like, no, he really is present and he really does want to help us and he will. But he won't force himself on us. So keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. If you haven't seen signs from the Lord helping you through this, ask him like, Lord, I can't see you. Are you with me? Are you helping me? I'd like to see you. Can you show me where your help is? Can you come help me, please? Whether you've ever talked to God or not, this would be a great time to talk to him for the first time. He's just so loving and so kind, and he'll get you through the really difficult things. So again, in those instances, you can see where emotions started to overwhelm me, where I was thinking thoughts that weren't actually the truth, and they were leading me down a wrong pathway, a darker pathway, a pathway that would really hurt me, and even others around me if I kept that thinking. And actually really, even with the material things, I can see how fear, because you've just experienced this huge loss of the person. So it's like any loss, no matter how small, it triggers that feeling of loss of the person all over again, especially when you're new in the morning in the grieving process. And so that's what I was experiencing in the closet about the clothing. I don't want to let anything go because you've just had to let this person go. And it hurts so much. And I can see, and I want to remind you guys why keeping balance, walking with the Lord, filling yourself with the truth from his Bible, calling on him for help, asking yourself, what is the truth? What am I believing right now? Because I can see how easily somebody could go into disordered thinking that is really hard to get out of, where people start to cling to stuff because of as a trauma response of losing somebody or something, because it's like that's all you feel like you have left. And I've felt that feeling sweep up a few other times. I've found a few letters people had written to my dad, and it was like a blessing for me to read the things that my dad wrote in the past. And so I wanted to share those with some people. And so I've sent them out, and I've kind of felt a few times those feelings creep in, like, I can't let those things go, like he held these and he read these, and if I let them go, I'm letting him go. And no, that's not true. So finding that balance, yes, it's good and okay and comforting to keep some of their things, but we don't need to keep every single thing of theirs, because the truth is that doesn't bring them back. At the same time, we're all going to have a different time when we're ready to let go of things. So, for me, I had to do it quickly, and the Lord helped me to be able to do that quickly, and let go of things. For some people, you don't have that time restraint, so It might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 2 years. I don't know, it might be 5 years. But what I would say is asking the Lord to help you get the good balance, because it can get to a place where it's too long of a time and becomes unhealthy and can disorder your thinking to where now you're either have developed something like agoraphobia, or you've become a hoarder. Like it can quickly go into those things. And so even if it's already turned like that for you, ask the Lord. He can heal you and release you and loose those things from your soul, and teach you to walk in truth, so that those things won't rule you, or we won't develop obsessions or whatever. So finding that healthy balance. And again, when I talk about obsession, I was just going to mention, when we first lose a person, and again, there's no specific timeline, but I would say there is a time for each of us, and it will be different for each individual, where things become unhealthy, and it's time to put that behind us and move forward in a healthier way. I hope that's making sense. But what was I going to say? So with each of us, different timeline. Well, I totally lost my train of thought. I don't know what I was going to say right there, but I was just going to say a few other things that, so a few of my dad's things I was just going to say that have brought me comfort. I see a lot of people that are on like some grief groups or whatever things. People like, is this normal? I do this. Does anyone else do this? Like, we're all going to do some things differently, but some of the things are going to be similar. But like with me, some things that brought me comfort on the way for our trip out to California, my husband actually, without me knowing, had packed my childhood blanket, which I forgot I even had it here. It's like over 30 years old. He had packed that in the car for the trip. And then also some pillows that my dad got us for Christmas last year. He sent us this big box of those My Pillows for each of us in the family. And my husband just felt like that would be a comfort to me, and it didn't even cross my mind, and so we're driving, and I was ready to sleep, on the trip, and my husband hands me that My Pillow and blanket, and I was just like, wow, this is so sweet. I cried, and it was so comforting to me though, because it was a gift that my dad had got us and thought of us. It was kind and it was practical, and those are kinds of gifts he liked to give. And then my childhood blanket, like I had no idea that would be something that would be comforting to me, but it really was. And because it represented a time when, my whole family lived in the home together. My dad and I probably snuggled on the couch with that before, or, whatever, all the different thoughts that come in, and it really brought me comfort. And then when we, went through my dad's things, I got a couple of his sweatshirts. And one of those sweatshirts, when I got home, it brought me great comfort too. I slept on it. I just laid it down, and I just laid on it for, I don't know, a week or a couple weeks, and just brought me comfort being close to that sweatshirt. And then he had this special blanket that was a gift that we gave him one Christmas, and I had got to help pin it and sew it. And, I brought that home, and it was really neat because after it being here for a while, I had more memories, and I actually remember going to the store with my mom and picking out that material specifically for my dad. And so, but interestingly, when I came home, I wasn't quite ready to sleep with that blanket yet. And so I just set it aside, knowing like, okay, I'll know when I'm ready, knowing that it was there if I wanted it. And I think about a week or two ago, I got it, and I've been sleeping with that blanket, and it brings me great comfort and again, that blanket's like 30 years old at least, maybe give or take a few years, but it was also special because it was a gift to him from us, and he held on to it this whole time, and, he slept with that. And so that has been a great comfort to me. And having these things that bring us comfort just kind of makes you feel close to them, close to their memories. It doesn't mean that you're regressing back to your childhood. It doesn't mean that you're, going to an unhealthy place again. Asking the Lord to help you keep balance, because you could go to an unhealthy place. You could really let these things go and turn and take over you. They really could take over your mind and take over your life. We could become obsessive with things very easily. The human mind does that. And so, because of like the sin nature or whatever, but the Lord is faithful and he would help us and does help us work through those things. So just looking within yourself, and not allowing yourself to get to that place, or if you already have, realizing, okay, this is an unhealthy place. Lord, help me get out of here. Help me get back to a place of health. And not to be ashamed and not to beat yourself up either. And then another tip, so I gave you the tip about the deep breaths. Another tip, I read this a lot of years ago. I had a lot of struggles with anxiety. And a lot of us who struggle with anxiety is fear. That's what anxiety is. And so a lot of people don't want to admit that they're scared or they have fear of something. And some people don't even realize that's actually what anxiety is. It's a root of fear. And a lot of us, any trauma, any tragedy, anything that has created fear in us, loss, anything that's been unsettling or chaotic can create fear. And it can be something that happened when we were 2 years old. It can even be something that happened in the womb. It can be something that happened as adulthood, as a teenager, whatever. But with anxiety, I read this somewhere a long time ago and I was really struggling and desperate. And I was like, I'm going to try this. And so one of the things that the person had said was, when you start to feel your anxiety coming in, there's some part of you inside that is experiencing fear, whether it feels like fear or not, that's what it is. And so they were saying an exercise is, of course, the deep breaths. Another exercise to do with that is actually saying out loud to yourself, as you would a friend, the same way you would comfort a friend. You could say, hey, you're okay, or hey, you're safe, or hey, it's okay, we're safe. Something like that. If you saw a friend who was feeling overwhelmed or anxious, you would tell them in a kind voice. You wouldn't shame them. You wouldn't put them down. You wouldn't say it in a rude way. And so they were saying, say that to yourself, and don't just say it in your head, but actually say it out loud. There's something about hearing it in an auditory way. And I started practicing that as an adult, and it really did help. And also, it wasn't just in the moment. Like, it would help me in the moment, like, hey, it's okay, there's nothing to be scared of, or say a couple different things to yourself. But basically what you're doing is you're reassuring yourself that you're not back in that place, wherever that that original trigger is from, or it could be many that have built up over time, but you're reassuring yourself. And we all need reassurance. And we don't have our parent there to reassure us as for an adult and living our own life, or whatever it is, but like kind of called reparenting. So it's, the idea is, in our brains, something has triggered the fear response because of something that we have experienced in the past. Well, saying that to yourself is a good exercise in retraining your brain for that trigger over time to not create that level of fear and anxiety in you. And so